Thank you. As Robin just mentioned, I've been asked to provide a global perspective. And this is very challenging without drowning people in data. So I've taken a slightly different route. First of all, I'm not going to be doing a PowerPoint. And instead, I'm going to really try to synthesize my remarks around a couple of kind of overarching points. The first one around what I'm going to refer to as the stepping stone theory of technology adoption. And that'll be the first part of my talk. And in the second part, I'm going to be a little bit more provocative maybe and kind of push us to think critically about how these digital media intermediaries need to evolve to meet some of the changing economic and technological realities. Again, based on some of the data that we've seen in our research. But let me start with that stepping stone theory. And it goes something like this, that a person will use a computer at a public library or another center when they cannot afford home access, or when they have no home access. And then it continues that once that person, or if that person gets home access, then they will then stop going to the library or other digital intermediary. So in this theory, or in this formulation, the public access computer is considered to be a temporary, transitory form of access. And as such, it follows then that the purpose of these public places is to serve as a stepping stone, so to speak, en route to that ultimate goal of home access. So I'm going to spend a few moments kind of interrogating this thesis, drawing on some of the evidence that we've seen in some of the work that we've done and others, both across developed and developing countries. And I believe it's important because the theory, perhaps maybe unknowingly or unwittingly, drives a number of public policy decisions. One can imagine as home penetration increases, there might be less of a policy imperative to provide public access because we feel that people must then, therefore, be migrating from one to the other. In the developing world where I do most of my work, this is really firmly believed, particularly with all of the attention on mobile telephony, which has captured attention in the last few years. So what does the evidence suggest? In our large-scale study that we've just completed, we looked at this question. And what we found in this is this, like in the 5 low and middle income countries where we have data on this particular issue, in all countries, the percentage of public access users who also had home access was actually higher than the national averages in those countries. In other words, let's take Brazil for an example. 40% of the people who visited public access centers also had home access. And that compares to 24% of the national population. And it was a similar story in Chile, Bangladesh, Ghana, and the Philippines. We also looked at this question through kind of a more in-depth exploration of teenagers who have mobile internet. And this was done in South Africa. And these are the kind of cutting-edge people you would expect to maybe have migrated away from public access. But here again, we found kind of an interesting pattern. Yes, they're heavy users of the mobile phones, mostly for kind of social activities, but they're also heavy users of libraries and other places because they could rely on the large screens, the software, keyboards to produce, to engage in other activities that were more conducive to that arrangement. So again, this kind of lent some more evidence to dispelling this notion that mobiles in this case would obviate the need for computers. Those are developing countries, and in the developed world, in Europe in particular, we kind of see similar patterns. The TNS study in Europe that we've heard about, we see that library computer usage is actually highest in the countries that rank highest in home access. Finland and Denmark, which had 84 and 90% of home access, and they are also simultaneously the largest computer users in public libraries. At the information school where I work, at the University of Washington, my colleagues did a study of in the US, and found that 1/3 of the population, 77 million, used a public access computer at a library. And over 3/4 of them have home access. Incidentally, that 77 million figure is more than all the people who are more than the people who attended all major sporting events combined. So I think, I mentioned this because I think it's important to note that public access exists side by side home access. It's not a substitute. At the same time, we do know that the stepping stone theory is evident in the data as well. Again, it's not a mutually exclusive phenomenon. That is, for some people, they do use public access computers until they have home access. In our global study, we found about 15% of people who do not currently go to public access venues were former users. And when asked why they stopped going to the public access venue, about 3/4 of them did say that they now have home internet. So evidently for this particular group, home access has replaced public access. But also let's look at that a bit, because is this really such a bad outcome? We found that over 60% of public access users had their first experience with the internet at a public access venue. Moreover, over half of them, more over 50% of respondents reported that public access venues were the most important place for learning digital skills. And that's more than double the rates in schools or homes, where you would expect it to be much higher. The figures for the former users were quite similar. And what this, I think, data underscores is the critical role that these digital intermediaries play in preparing people, giving people the digital skills and preparing them with the skills they need to take part in the digital world. And they've introduced them to the information society, even if they've moved on to home access. Sorry, I came down with a cold this morning. So now I'm going to move to the second part of my talk. And here I'm going to be a little bit more provocative, because so far I've been talking about how great digital intermediaries are, and has all of the panelists here. And the data strongly supports that. There's no question about it. And then for those of you who are interested, I've left a flyer on the end of that last table there with information about this global impact study that we conducted that has lots of data about the impacts across all the various areas that we heard about today. But I'll let people access that at your convenience. By the way, we also provide all the raw data for that stuff for the researchers in the crowd who want to go in and crunch some numbers, including the raw data for the TNS survey. So there's lots of raw data there that can be analyzed much further. So now I'm switching gears now to my second point here, and it touches most closely on the theme of employability and entrepreneurship, but it extends further than that. And my aim here is to kind of expose some data that will maybe encourage us to think of new ways that digital intermediaries can better respond to economic and technological changes. And my concern, which I'll talk about in a minute, which I've seen in both data and visits to many places around the world, is what I would say is an overemphasis on access as the primary reason for providing computers and internet for the public. Now, of course, we've heard fantastic examples of places that do all sorts of innovative services on top of that. But that said, I would still submit that most libraries and others see that their primary reason is to provide access. And there's good reason for that. Libraries have existed for millennia. The access to information model is a successful one. But one of the tenets of that model is that people should have a one-to-one relationship with the information source, right? You borrow a book, you read it, and you return it. And I think what's happened with computers is we've basically extended that same mentality to computers. We provide a computer in a carousel or a table for people to use in a one-to-one relationship with that computer. It's a natural extension of the book model. But just because people might prefer to read a book on their own does not necessarily imply that that's how people want to use technology. At a recent talk I gave in South Africa, I asked the audience, mostly librarians, what challenges they had with how people use the computers. And the answer I got was that they were frustrated that they always had to return the furniture to their original locations at the end of the day. So what was happening was that patrons were reconfiguring the space so they could interact with each other. In other words, what was the most important for these people was the ability to work or socialize with each other, while at the same time having computers and other resources at their disposal. Now, so Clay Shirky, who's a new media specialist at NYU, has made comments about this phenomenon, and he has said, quote, "We systematically overestimate the value of access to information and underestimate the value of access to each other." And it's a provocative statement, but I think it's one that we need to take seriously, because the access to each other model might be a superior model than the access to information one when it comes to technology use. So in our global study, we did actually look at this question inadvertently. I didn't know we were looking at it at the time, but that's why the data is there. And we found kind of three things to bolster this view. And this was data just from Ghana. For some reason, we only collected this data in Ghana. But first was that over 50% of the people that came to the public centers came there with other people. Secondly, over 2/3 of them reported that sharing the space, sharing the technology, made their work more productive. And thirdly, fully 3/4 of the respondents said they were interested in environments that would better support enhanced collaborative work. So no wonder the South African librarians were frustrated. People do not want a solitary one-on-one experience. They can get that at home. So this is where I think that digital intermediaries need to pick up the pace a bit and adapt to how people want to use technology, which is with other people. And from other research, we see that the sharing of space and technology facilitates learning, allows people to collaborate, whether it's around homework or to start a new business, and otherwise encourages creative explorations of technology. And as many people in this audience may know, there's been an explosion of maker spaces, hacker spaces, co-working spaces, fab labs, hubs, and other physical locations where people are congregating to engage with technology and be producers of new digital as well as physical artifacts, not just consumers of information. So there's a public policy imperative at work here as well. In the US, and where I know the data better, freelance and self-employed workers now represent 1/4 of the workforce, and it's expected to increase to either from 30% to maybe potentially 50% in the years to come. And there are similar data in other parts of the world as well. So these co-working places, some of these places where you can physically convene, are providing the environments that these entrepreneurs and small business owners need to do the work that will again drive economies. So I think in closing, I think we have I would like to kind of repeat that we have now amassed a very large body of evidence now to support these contention, to support the fact that digital intermediaries are playing very valuable services. But in doing that, I think I want to just also emphasize that we should resist the stepping stone theory that they will somehow become less needed as home penetration increases. And at the same time, we cannot be complacent. Let's look at the data, see how people want to use technology, and make sure that our digital intermediaries are responding to those needs in kind. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
So, open to yourselves a few questions, and then
I was very interested to hear your stepping stone theory. My name is Diana Edmonds, and I work predominantly in London, in the UK, but I've also been looking at rural situations recently. Basically, many councillors, people who are responsible for public libraries and who want to close them, will say everybody has a computer now, so that's okay. And in a way, your stepping stone theory, or the stepping stone theory, kind of, that works there, doesn't it? Because in a rural context, you have a fairly static population, and so you might say, fine, they might once have used the public library, but now they're okay. And sure, that ignores all the social stuff, but if we look at London, where we have a constant migrant community, we have people coming in who have that primary need to access a PC. And so we might have people moving on. And I just think this is very interesting, how these theories might be applied to different contexts, and how there might be an understanding in one context that that would work. You know, you've got rid of everybody and they've all gone home to use their PCs, whereas what we see in London is increasing demand for PCs. So we've got the migrant communities coming in. I do think, however, that people don't want to work in isolation, and so we see increasing pressure on public libraries for space and PCs, and everybody wants to have, if not an actual physical PC, a plug-in for their PC, because they do need space, and in crowded urban contexts they don't have that space to work alone with their PC. But they certainly do want to work together, and we have to employ people before the library opens to move all the furniture back, because everybody has been moving it around. And so what we are seeing is that people who have PCs do want to come in and work together, even if they've got a PC at home, because part of what we're doing is allowing creative space and people to actually work together. So I think I'm not really making a point, but just saying this is all very interesting, and thank you for your paper.
Thank you for those comments. I will provide one answer on this kind of home access versus library access. Even if they have home access, why would they also use the library access? There's a lot of reasons. Faster connection, better equipment, assistance from the librarian, and maybe competition from other members of their families in homes, right? And that happens a lot, where somebody can't get on the computer because their older brother is on it, and they need to do their homework. So even if there is home access, there's lots of other reasons that people will use the computer at the library.
Okay, question or comment at the back?
I've got a question for Chris Coward and one for Dr. Gianluca Misaraka. The question to Mr. Coward is, have you any data also on how people appreciate what staff are doing to them, the professional staff members of public libraries? Is an important aspect of for them in using a public library. And my second question is, maybe I missed something in your explanation or in your presentation because you gave a lot of data, but I'm very anxious to know if you have any results on how the intermediaries network between each other. Are they cooperating, and do they have an effect in their cooperation between each other?
I think I understood your question about the importance of the staff, the role of the staff. Yeah, we did look at that question, and it is one of the top reasons that people go to a library is because they can get the assistance from the staff. It's also to be with other people, to the peer learning, but having the staff assistance there is critical for many people, particularly novice users.
Yes, well, your question is very important, and indeed we wanted to capture the network's effects. In the survey we try with some questions, but of course this is something that need further exploration. Indeed, it seems that, most of the organization, at least in our sample, are members of networks or are networks themselves, and the size of this network range, and some are quite big networks. We have an example in Andalusia, the region where we say that there are the Guadalupe network there of telecenters and has more than 700, 800 members, and then all Spain there are at least 5,000 telecenters in the network of telecenters in Spain. And so this is probably the case is in many countries in Europe, and in fact we believe this is an important element. But how to actually value the potential of the effort of these networks and how the networks operate was not easy to capture at the EU level. In the locality mapping we have conducted in the 3 areas I mentioned, this was much more clear, and in fact there are kind of let's say implicit networking among the various actors, and in fact I would like to stress that indeed libraries are an important intermediary, but there are other others that actually complement perhaps the functions, the social functions that perhaps the libraries cannot fully engage with. And so it is important to see how they overlaps, but sometimes let's say work together informally more than formally. An issue that is very important and probably require further research as well, and is also the role of the public sector, and of course this is different. I mean the government, so is different according to different governance models in Europe, and of course there are say various layers of government providing support or funding networks, and these are sometimes also not working in a coordinated way. So this also needs probably a further intervention from policymakers as well.